Very good morning to one and all person here. Today we are going to discuss about the potassium homeostasis. Normally in our body we are having the two major cations. One is sodium, another one is potassium. Potassium is mainly present in the intracellular compartment and sodium is mainly present in the extracellular fluid. The total body potassium is around 50 milliequivalents per kg, which is in case of 70 kg normal human body weight, we are having almost 3000 milliequivalents of potassium distributed in our body, out of which 98% is present in the intracellular compartment and only 2% is present in the extracellular fluid. The intracellular compartment is mainly distributed in the four vital organs. In skeletal muscle, we are having almost 2500 milliequivalents of potassium. Second one is the RBC and bone marrow. Each of them is having 250 milliequivalents of potassium, and liver is having 300 milliequivalents of potassium. So potassium is mainly responsible for the excitability of the tissue. How? Normally in cell membrane we are having the sodium potassium ATPase, which is pumping the 2 potassium into the cells coupled with 3 sodium into the extracellular space. So in intracellular space and extracellular space, the potassium in the intracellular space will be more than the potassium in the extracellular space. This potential difference creating the cell membrane more excitable for the action potential. So this is responsible for the normal excitability of cardiac, skeletal muscles and nerve tissues. So the normal potassium homeostasis is maintained by the daily intake and daily excretion. So what is the normal potassium intake recommended dietary allowance? We are almost taking 200 to 400 milliequivalents of potassium per day, but out of which 90% of the potassium is excreted by the renal and 10% is being excreted at the colon. That means that the normal potassium homeostasis is maintained by secretion, whether increasing or decreasing the secretion. But normally the sodium homeostasis is maintained by the reabsorption. So either increasing or decreasing the reabsorption of the sodium. So who is maintaining the potassium homeostasis? So we are having the two vital organs. One is kidney and another one is colon, where the major potassium is being excreted. Out of 90% of the potassium is excreted at the kidney and 10% of the potassium is excreted at the colon. So these are the vital organs mainly controlling the potassium homeostasis in all of the human body. In kidney, DCT is the organ. In colon, we are having the cell membrane channels at the level of colonic crypts. So the BK channel present in the colon is responsible for the potassium sensing capability. So it's sensing the dietary potassium intake and it's controlling the colonic secretion of potassium, which can be either increased in case of dietary potassium excess and it can be decreased in case of dietary potassium deficit. So by which it can be regulated in the normal extracellular fluid compartment potassium. Likewise in DCT we are having two part, DCT1 and DCT2. So when the dietary potassium is taken, it reaching the colon where we are having the enteric sensor. This enteric sensor is activating the KS wing channel, which is the kidney specific WNK pathway, which is present mainly in the DCT1. So WNK1. in DCT1. So we are having the glomerulus from which the fluid is reaching the BCT, then loop of Henle, then it is reaching the DCT. In DCT we are having two parts. One is DCT1 and DCT2. DCT2 is otherwise called as aldosterone sensitive collecting duct. So aldosterone is the hormone which is controlling the potassium secretion at the level of DCT2. But DCT1 we are having the WNK pathway and sodium chloride cotransport, which is the main transporter compartment which is present in the DCT, responsible for the almost 9% of sodium reabsorption, and 1% of the sodium reabsorption is controlled at the level of epithelial sodium channel in the DCT2 and collecting duct, right? So epithelial sodium channel is present in the DCT2 and collecting duct, and sodium chloride cotransport is present in the DCT1. So this Wnt pathway, which is if the sensed by the enteric sensor, in turn activating the chloride channel, so it increasing the intracellular chloride level. So intracellular chloride level is increased, which in turn inhibiting the sodium chloride cotransport. So the sodium chloride cotransporter is inhibited by means of activation of WNK1KS cotransport, as well as there is increased delivery of sodium, because when the dietary potassium is increased, we are having increased glomerular filtration, which in turn increases the excessive delivery of sodium into the distal nephron. So the excessive sodium delivery into the distal nephron is sensed by the WNK genes and WNK pathway, which in turn inhibiting the sodium chloride cotransport. This finally increasing the delivery of sodium to the distal part of the collecting duct, collecting convoluted tubule, where the aldosterone sensitive epithelium sodium channel is present. So this epithelium sodium channel is started functioning, and it is causing the reabsorption of sodium into the plasma. So finally, due to this reabsorption of sodium, we are hitting intraluminal negative charge at the level of collecting duct and DCT. So to compensate the intraluminal negative charge, there is a channel called ROMK channel, which is the renal outer medullary potassium channel. So this renal outer medullary potassium channel is the main transporter responsible for the potassium buffering capacity of the DCT. So to counteract the intraluminal negative charge, potassiums are being transported from the extracellular compartment to the intraluminal space. So we are getting maximum potassium secreted into the urine, by which we are excreting the excessive amount of potassium ingested through the diet. So we are excreting the potassium at the level of ROMK channel. This is called aldosterone paradox. So normally aldosterone is the hormone secreted by the adrenal cortex, which is responsible for the activation of epithelial sodium channel. But even the dietary intake of excessive potassium will activate the colonic sensor, which in turn activating the kidney specific WNK pathway, which is inhibiting the sodium chloride cotransport, which leads to the increased delivery of sodium to the DCT2, which activating the epithelial sodium channel, and upregulation of the epithelial sodium channel causing the intraluminal negative charge, which in turn activate the ROMK pathway, which leads to the excessive potassium secretion. So even in the absence of aldosterone, there is activation of the epithelial ROMK channels and epithelial sodium channel, which is maintaining the potassium balance in our body. So if we are having the either increased or decreased level of potassium in the human body, there must be the either there is a defect at the level of colon, or there may be a defect at the level of DCT. So First we will discuss about the hypokalemia. Hypokalemia is defined as the potassium level of serum is less than 3.5 milliequivalents. So normal potassium level in the human body is 3.5 to 5.3 milliequivalents. When the serum potassium is below the level of 3.5, it will lead to various presentation to our clinical practice. So sodium and potassium has to be monitored in all inpatients because these are the common electrolyte disturbance which are encountered in the most of outpatients and inpatient clinical setting, and without monitoring the sodium and potassium level may lead to the adverse outcome. So monitoring of potassium and sodium is mandatory in all type of the patients. So how can we explain the hypokalemia? This type of hypokalemia can be two types. So if the patient is having hypokalemia, it can be transient, which is completely reversible, or it can be permanent. That means there is a long-standing causes for the hypokalemia. So transient is mainly because of the transcellular shift, and permanent is because of potassium deficit. So what do you mean by transcellular shift? To understand the basic, we are having normal cell. There are two types of channels present in the cell membrane responsible for the potassium homeostasis. When we are considering this is as extracellular fluid, when the patient is having excessive H plus ions, that is metabolic acidosis present in the body. When there is happening of metabolic acidosis in the any patient, this will lead to the activation of hydrogen sodium antipode, which causing transport of hydrogen into the intracellular compartment and export of sodium into the extracellular compartment. So this sodium has to be replaced to the intracellular compartment to maintain the homeostasis, for which we are getting the activation of sodium potassium ATPase. So this channel will transport 3 sodium into the cells and 2 potassium out of the cells. So finally it will leads to the increased level of potassium in the extracellular compartment. So in any metabolic acidosis can lead to the accumulation of potassium in the extracellular compartment, which is associated with the hyperkalemia. Same wise, when the patient is having metabolic alkalosis, the sodium hydrogen antipode is inhibited, which in turn leads to the inhibition of sodium potassium ATPase pump. So finally the patient may land up in having the hypokalemia. In case if the patient is having the intracellular acidosis like lactic acidosis, this will lead to increased level of H plus ion in the intracellular compartment. So this will again activate the H plus and sodium antipode, but the mechanism is opposite to the previous mechanism. Here the H plus is being pumped out into the extracellular compartment and sodium is transported to the intracellular compartment. So this sodium has to be pumped back to the extracellular compartment, for which 3 sodium 2 potassium antipode is functioning. So this finally result in the hypokalemia. So if the patient is having metabolic acidosis, the patient is having associated hyperkalemia. But if the patient is having the lactic acidosis, there will be presence of hypokalemia associated with lactic acidosis. So this is responsible for the metabolic transcellular shift of potassium. So if the patient is having either hyperkalemia or hypokalemia, the first cause should be ruled out is the changes in the transcellular shift. So there are various factors which is controlling the sodium potassium ATPase activity, which is responsible for the transient changes in the potassium level in the body. So to understand the basic, what are the things we need to understand? First, which increasing the potassium uptake into the cell. There are certain things which increasing the potassium secretion into the extracellular fluid. In normally, the sodium potassium ATPase pump, which is mainly activated by postprandial insulin release. So every time while we are having our food, the insulin is being released from the pancreas. So there is insulin causing the GLUT sensitive activation of GLUT transporters present in the muscle, adipose tissue as well as in kidney. This GLUT cells activating the potassium glucose co-transport, which causing the influx of potassium into the muscle cells. So insulin is the major organ which is upregulating the sodium potassium ATPase pump, causing the potassium influx into the cells. So this may explain the excessive hypokalemia in the treatment of diabetic ketoacidosis with the insulin therapy. And whenever you are doing the exercise, there will be activation of beta 2 stretch receptor present in the muscle. So this will in turn activating the sodium potassium ATPase. So this leads to the transcellular shift of potassium from the extracellular compartment to the intracellular compartment. Actually this is happening for the benefit of the patient, because whenever the patient is having the exercise, there will be muscle injury as well as efflux of potassium from the muscles into the extracellular compartment. Along with there is activation of the sodium potassium ATPase pump, which will pump back the potassium being shifted to the extracellular compartment back into the intracellular compartment. So this explains the pathological behind the hypokalemia in any condition causing the activation of sympathetic activity. Whenever there is a sympathetic overactivity, this will lead to transcellular shift of potassium into the muscle. For example, alcohol withdrawal, pain. This may causes the excessive shift of potassium from the extracellular compartment to the intracellular compartment. So whenever the possibility of transcellular shift is happening, the patient may be land up in having the hypokalemia. Likewise, metabolic alkalosis, which I already discussed, is inhibiting the metabolic alkalosis in turn activating the inhibiting the sodium potassium ATPase pump, so which will turn causing the shift of potassium from the extracellular compartment to the intracellular compartment. So metabolic alkalosis and sympathetic overactivity, exercise, postprandial insulin secretion are responsible for the potassium increase into the cells. So whenever the possibility of hypokalemia can happen transiently, when there is a excessive insulin release or excessive exercise or excessive sympathetic overactivity, the patient may be having hypokalemia. So there is a terminology called periodic hypokalemic paralysis. This means that the patient used to have the episodes of paralysis because of hypokalemia, which is periodic in nature. There are two types, familial and acquired. And acquired type is mostly associated with thyrotoxicosis. So thyrotoxicosis is being most common in the female. There is a increased female predominance in case of acquired disease, but familial disease having the equal male and female presentation. So usually young patient, if presented with sudden onset of paralysis or quadriparesis, we should always consider the possibility of hypokalemic periodic paralysis. So if the patient is having susceptibility to hypokalemic periodic paralysis, there are precipitating factors or risk factor which is responsible for the events of hypokalemia. So we have already discussed that there is insulin release, excessive insulin release, exercise followed by relaxation period, pain, sympathetic overactivity, ketogenic diet, low carbohydrate diet and high fat diet. These all associated with excessive release of insulin, which in turn causing the hypokalemia. So these patients may be presented to the casualty with the hypokalemia with a history of any following risk factors which is precipitating even for the evidence of hypokalemia. So next we will discuss about the permanent hypokalemia, so which is caused and reported in most of the inpatients. So what is causing the hypokalemia in these patients? So in this patient we can explain the hypokalemia by three different mechanisms. One is decreased potassium intake, or it can be because of increased potassium loss. This increased potassium loss can be extrarenal or renal. So first we will discuss about the decreased potassium intake. So we have already discussed that dietary potassium is the main source of potassium, but the potassium homeostasis is maintained by the DCT and colonic Krebs. So when the patient is having dietary deficit of potassium, the patient may have episodes of hypokalemia. So what are the diet products which are low in potassium? The most common is fat diet, keto diet, and patient with anorexia nervosa, they tend to have less appetite. So all these patients having excessive release of insulin, which is associated with hypokalemia. And if the patient is having the habit of eating clay, for example in the pregnancy or postpartum period, females tends to have increased geographia, which is nothing but pica. So these patients will be having pica as the habit because of the hormonal changes. This in turn associated with decreased potassium absorption at the level of colon. This will lead to the potassium deficit. Next, the most common etiology behind the hypokalemia is potassium loss. So this potassium loss can be extrarenal or renal. So in terms to describe this, we will discuss first about the extrarenal causes of potassium. So we have already discussed that the another buffering mechanism is colon. So whenever there is increased potassium secretion in the colon, the patient may have hypokalemia. So whenever there is patient is having VIPoma, secretory diarrhea, these patients will be having excessive secretion of chloride, potassium as well as sodium into the stools. So these patients will be having the normal renal compensatory reabsorption of sodium, potassium and chloride, but normally the renal have the capacity to reabsorb sodium almost 100%, but the potassium reabsorption capacity of renal system is limited, which means that the renal has to eliminate at least 15 milliequivalents of potassium per 24 hours daily. This is the maximum capacity to which the renal system can be functioning. So in case of dietary deficit or hypokalemia, the renal compensation will be very low. So the patients with VIPoma or secretory diarrhea, or if the patient is having the excessive sweating, this is also the possible source of potassium loss. So whenever the patient is working in the hot humid environment or exercise, especially the patients with athlete, soccer players, football players are more tend to have the excessive sweating. So these patients may have the possibility of hypokalemia induced heat cramps. So next one is the renal. So this is the most common etiological factor because of which the patient is usually presented to the outpatient department with the hypokalemic presentation. So what are the renal causes? To understand the renal system, we need to understand the hormonal balance which is acting in the renal system. So normally renin is being released from the juxtaglomerular apparatus, which is causing the angiotensin converting enzyme, and finally synthesis of angiotensin 2, which is synthesizing the aldosterone and which is activating the epithelial sodium channel, and this causing the reabsorption of sodium, which is compensated by potassium secretion. So whenever there is a overactivity of any of this system, this will lead to the excessive potassium secretion, and which in turn leads to the hypokalemia. So when the patient is presented to you with hypokalemia, the first approach is to examine the patient's blood pressure. So if the patient is having hypokalemia plus metabolic acidosis, so the first step in approach to the hypokalemia is doing the ABG to see whether the patient is having either metabolic acidosis or metabolic alkalosis. If the patient is having the hypokalemia along with metabolic acidosis, this is a rare phenomena, because we have already discussed that most of the patient with hypokalemia will be having metabolic alkalosis, but there is few patients in which the metabolic acidosis can be associated with hypokalemia. The most common etiology is renal tubular acidosis. In renal tubular acidosis, proximal and distal type, there will be excessive bicarbonate is being lost. So bicarbonate lost will be excess in renal. So this bicarbonate is being negative in charge, which is impermeable at the level of for reabsorption. So to compensate the negative charge in the lumen, the Romke channels will be overactive. This will lead to excessive potassium secretion. So these patients will be having hypokalemia associated metabolic acidosis. So always have the possibility of thinking metabolic acidosis in these patients. And there are other causes like excessive vomiting, which in turn leads to loss of H+, which is compensated by reabsorption of bicarbonate. So there will be excessive bicarbonate present in these patients, which will be excreted by the kidney, which causing the again bicarbonate urea. So the same mechanism will be activating. So this will lead to the potassium excretion. So in the patients with RTA, there will be metabolic acidosis and hypokalemia, and the patient used to have vomiting, there will be associated metabolic alkalosis and hypokalemia, but the mechanism behind the hypokalemia is same in both of these patients. So we have classified the patient with hypokalemia with metabolic acidosis. So far we have discussed the hypokalemic patients associated with the metabolic acidosis. So the next possible mechanism is the most common presentation of hypokalemia with the metabolic alkalosis. So whenever the patient is having metabolic alkalosis, the next step is examining the patient's blood pressure. So we need to classify the patient is having hypertension or patient is having normotension. So the most of the patient having the hypertension, there will be excessive activity of renin aldosterone angiotensin system, because the patient's main potassium is maintained by the mechanism of potassium secretion, which in turn controlled by the aldosterone. So we have already discussed that there is a normal renin angiotensin aldosterone pathway which is controlling the potassium excretion. So whenever there is a excessive level of renin or aldosterone or excessive epithelial sodium channel activation, there will be excessive potassium secretion, which in turn leads to the hypokalemia. So there is a possibility of 3 different combination in these patients. The combination 1 is patient is having excessive renin secretion because of the renal artery stenosis or renin secreting tumor. Whenever there is a renal artery stenosis, there will be renal ischemia, which will cause the excessive release of renin, which in turn activating the excessive aldosterone secretion. So excessive aldosterone will lead to excessive sodium reabsorption and decreasing the potassium by potassium secretion. So these patients will be having hypertension because of the excessive sodium reabsorption, also hypokalemia because of the potassium secretion. The second group is the patient with the primary hyperaldosteronism. So the lesion is at the level of adrenal gland. There will be primary adrenal hyperplasia, which in turn causing the excessive aldosterone level. So these patients will be having hypertension and hypokalemia, but because of the negative feedback mechanism, these patients' renin level will be low. And there is a terminology called glucocorticoid suppressible hyperaldosteronism. And to understand this thing, we need to understand the basic synthesis of mineralocorticoid and glucocorticoid. So all of them are synthesized from the 23 carbon molecule, which is the cholesterol. So cholesterol is converted into the progesterone, which is converted into the deoxycortisone and 21 alpha hydroxylase. So normally the progesterone is metabolized to 17 hydroxyprogesterone by the enzyme 17 alpha hydroxylase. From the action of 21 hydroxylase, there will be synthesis of deoxycortisone and deoxycortisol. These two molecules having the mineralocorticoid like activity. That means both of them having the activity of aldosterone. But normally these two molecules will be catabolized to corticosterone and cortisol by the enzyme 11 beta hydroxylase. So this cortisone is synthesized into the aldosterone and the cortisol is degraded into the cortisone. This is the normal synthesis of glucocorticoid and mineralocortical. In all patients, there will be epithelial sodium channel having the receptor, which is normally having the high level of sensitivity to the cortisol, and this sensitive affinity for the aldosterone will be very low in most of the patients with the epithelial sodium channel. So the patients having normal aldosterone action, the cortisol has been converted into the cortisone by the 11 beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase enzyme. So normally the epithelial sodium channel will be responsible or more affinity to the aldosterone. Whenever there is a abnormal thing happening in these normal synthesis pathway, there will be possibility of hypokalemia. So the first possibility is glucocorticoid suppressible hyperaldosteronism. The pathology behind this is activation of the 11 beta hydroxylase as well as aldosterone synthase. So aldosterone synthase and 11 beta hydroxylase are produced by the different gene. So cytochrome B aldosynthase and cytochrome B 11 beta hydroxylase gene will be fused in these patients. So normally whenever there is a activation of 11 beta hydroxylase by the ACTH stimulation, there will be excessive synthesis of the aldosterone. But these patients will be having the normal dexamethasone suppressant test. So because of the fusion of these two genes, these patients will be having excessive level of aldosterone, which in turn causing the excessive level of aldosterone but reduced level of renin, and the patient is having hypertension and hypokalemia. The third possible mechanism is the patient is maybe having the reduced level of renin as well as reduced level of aldosterone. I have already explained this. There is a terminology called aldosterone paradox, which means even in the absence or hypoaldosteronism, there will be epithelial sodium channel activation whenever there is a excessive dietary potassium. Likewise, normally the epithelial sodium channels will be having the high affinity for the cortisol, but the cortisol is being converted into the cortisone, so the normal sensitivity of epithelial sodium channel will be highest for the aldosterone. But there is an enzyme called 11 beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase 2, which is normally synthesized in our body. Whenever there is a deficiency of this because of the loss of function mutation, there will be no conversion of cortisol to cortisone. So the patients will be having normal level of cortisol in our body, but this cortisol having the high affinity for epithelial sodium channel. So these patients will be having excessive activity of epithelial sodium channel because of the high affinity of epithelial sodium channels to the normal cortisol level. So in turn, these patients will be having reduced level of renin as well as aldosterone. So this is terminology called as syndrome of apparent mineralocorticoid excess, which means the patient is actually having normal level of mineralocorticoid, but this patient having the excessive activity of mineralocorticoid because of the defective enzyme. This explains the hypokalemia as well as hypoaldosteronism in most of the patients. For example, patients with cirrhosis, there will be excessive level of bile acids which is inhibiting this 11-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase enzyme. So these patients will be having the reduced level of aldosterone, but there will be excessive activity of cortisol. So these patients will be having the hypokalemia as well as metabolic alkalosis because of the hypokalemia. And the patients with the excessive ingestion of licorice, which is the most commonly used agent in preparation of the chewing tobaccos. So whenever the patient is having the excessive consumption of tobacco, this will inhibiting the 11-beta hydroxysteroid. So the patient will be land up in having the hypokalemia. Likewise, there is a herbal medicine called Assam boy, which is mostly prescribed for the treatment of allergic rhinitis in patients. So the most of the patients in Singapore and Nagaland used to have this herbal medication which have the high affinity for 11-beta hydroxysteroid enzyme, and because of the inhibition of this enzyme, these patients will be having the hypokalemia associated with the metabolic alkalosis. So this is called the syndrome of inapparent mineralocorticoid excess. The second mechanism is hypercortisolism. So when the patient is presented to you with hypokalemia and metabolic alkalosis, and we are measuring the patient's renin and aldosterone level. When the patient is having the reduced level of aldosterone, the first possible and the most common mechanism behind this excessive level of corticosteroids. This corticosteroid excess can be because of iatrogenic or Cushing syndrome. So anything it could be. So the patient is having the excessive glucocorticoid excess because of the primary hypercortisolism, which is called the Cushing syndrome, or excessive administration of iatrogenic hypercortisolism. These patients will be having the excessive mineralocorticoid like activity. So patient will be having the hypokalemia. So these are the different mechanism associated with the patient having hypokalemia, metabolic alkalosis and hypertension. So we have discussed the various etiology behind the hypokalemia, and the last but most important etiology is patients with normotensive hypokalemia. So in these patients there will be metabolic alkalosis because of the bicarbonate excess. So what is causing this? So whenever there is a excessive chloride excretion by the kidney, the body will counteract to maintain the homeostasis by increasing the bicarbonate reabsorption. So the drugs causing the chloride excretion or the genetic disorder associated with the excessive chloride excretion is associated with the bicarbonate excess in our body. So this will lead to the metabolic alkalosis. So whenever there is a metabolic alkalosis, this in turn lead to the hypokalemia. So the most commonly used diuretics like thiazide and loop diuretics. Thiazide diuretic is inhibiting the sodium chloride co-transport, and loop diuretic is inhibiting the sodium potassium 2-chloride co-transport. So whenever there is a inhibition of the chloride reabsorption, there will be excessive excretion of chloride by kidney. So this will lead to the decreased reabsorption of sodium as well as potassium. So these patients will be land up in having the hypokalemia. So there is a genetic disorder exactly mimicking the loop diuretic action and thiazide diuretics. So this is known as the Bartter and Gitelman syndrome. So in Gitelman syndrome, it is exactly like thiazide diuretic syndrome and Bartter syndrome. These patients may have the same mechanism because of the loss of function of activity mutation in the sodium chloride or sodium potassium 2 chloride channels. So these patients will be having the excessive chloride in the urine. So urinary chloride will be more than 15 milliequivalents in these patients. So this is the diagnostic criteria used for hypokalemia diagnosis in these patients. There is a terminology called Little syndrome, which is actually categorized in this level: patient with hypertension and hypoaldosteronism. So this is because mutation in the epithelial sodium channel. So this is like the same mechanism. There will be gain of function of mutation in the epithelial sodium channel. So there will be excessive activity of epithelial sodium channel in the Little syndrome, and these patients will be having excessive epithelial sodium channel activation, which will causing the excessive intraluminal negativity. So these patients will be land up in having the excessive potassium secretion. And this thiazide diuretics and loop diuretics associated also with magnesium deficiency. So normally the ROMK pathway is inhibited by the magnesium ions. Whenever there is a magnesium deficiency, there will be excessive activation of ROMK channel. This will lead to excessive secretion of potassium. So the patient will be having hypokalemia. So while correcting the hypokalemia, there is always possibility of hypomagnesemia and being the underlying cause. So this is the various mechanism behind the causes of hypokalemia. So we have broadly classified the hypokalemia because of either potassium deficit or excessive renal or extrarenal loss of potassium. So these patients will be presented to you with varying type of clinical presentation. So what are the common presentation of the hypokalemia? The most common presentation is decreased excitability of all excitable tissues. So the patient will be presenting with quadriparesis because of the decreased muscle excitability, and patient will be having fatigue, weakness, and these patients may be having calliopetic nephropathy. What is this? Whenever there is hypokalemia, there will be excessive polyuria. There are many mechanisms explain this. The major mechanism is hypokalemia is associated with the decreased aquaporin 2 channel expression, which will lead to excessive excretion of water as well as decreased response to arginine vasopressin level. So these patients with hypokalemia may have the differential diagnosis for polyuria, and there is a possibility of rhabdomyolysis in these patients. Usually rhabdomyolysis is the common cause for hyperkalemia, but why the hypokalemia is causing the rhabdomyolysis? Normally the patient is doing exercise, there will be increased potassium shift from the extracellular compartment to the interstitial space. So we have already explained this because of the activity of beta 2 adrenergic drive. So this interstitial space potassium is responsible for the vasodilation in exercising muscle, which is supplying the blood supply for exercise muscles. So normally the exercising muscle requiring excessive oxygen demand and metabolite supply, which is by the mechanism of vasodilation. So whenever there is hypokalemia, there will be no vasodilation in the exercising muscles. So this will lead to hypoxia at the level of muscle, which in turn lead to the muscle lysis, which is otherwise called as rhabdomyolysis. So this mechanism again explaining the excessive potassium intake that may causes decreased blood pressure. So patient with hypertension, there is a treatment modality suggesting excessive potassium intake. This is because of the vasodilatory effect of potassium, as well as whenever there is a increased potassium, there will be increased GFR, which in turn lead to the excessive sodium filtration. So this excessive potassium we have already discussed will inhibiting the DCT, sodium chloride co-transport. So this will lead to distal delivery of potassium to DCT2. Normally the sodium chloride channel is responsible for the 9% reabsorption of potassium, but this epithelium sodium channel is responsible for 1% reabsorption. When the patient is given with excessive potassium, the epithelial sodium channel are excessively activated. At the same time, the sodium chloride co-transport is inhibited. So this will explain the natriuresis effect of potassium in potassium intake. So this natriuresis will explain the decrease in blood pressure by the excessive dietary potassium. So whenever the patient is having hypokalemia, this patient having the high susceptibility for developing hypertension as well as diabetes. Why? Whenever there is a 1 milliequivalence decrease in potassium, there will be 10 milligram percentage of rise in the glucose, because hypokalemia explain the decreased activity of potassium ATPase present in the islet cells of pancreas, which is responsible for the insulin secretion. So in hypokalemia, patient will be having decreased level of insulin release, which is causing the diabetes for these patients. So these patients will be having increased risk of stroke and CAD. There will be increased risk for development of osteoporosis, because hypokalemia is associated with metabolic alkalosis. Metabolic alkalosis is always associated with osteopenia. So these patients will be having osteoporosis, as well as this patient may have nephrolithiasis. So long-term hypokalemia can be associated with the development of these complications in normal patients. So the treatment of hypokalemia is mandatory in all the type of patients. So what is the treatment for hypokalemia? Do we need to treat hypokalemia on emergency basis or on regular basis? First of all, most of the hypokalemia are because of the transient transcellular shift. So correcting the underlying etiology may be helpful in managing the transcellular shift. So the second one is because of the hypokalemia presentation to the outpatient department. When the hypokalemia is less than 3.5, we need to start the patient on oral potassium. So what are the available potassium solution in our hospitals? So it can be KCl syrup, potassium chloride tablet, or IV potassium chloride. In KCl syrup, 15 ml of syrup will be equivalent 10 milliequivalents of potassium, and 1 tablet is equal to 8 milliequivalents of potassium, and 10 ml is equal to 10 milliequivalents of potassium. Normally 1 milliequivalence deficit in the serum potassium is almost equal to the 200 to 400 milliequivalents of total body potassium. That means serum level is not mimicking the total body sodium potassium loss. So to correct the hypokalemia, we need to give excessive potassium for all type of patients. So this excessive potassium can be given via the oral route or IV route. So we need to prefer the oral route than IV route, because rapid correction of potassium is associated with the dangerous complication of hyperkalemia. There is always safe to have the patient in hypokalemia than hyperkalemia, because hyperkalemia is mostly associated with the immediate death but not the hypokalemia. So always correct the hypokalemia gradually. So how to correct the hypokalemia? So for the correction of hypokalemia, we can start the patients on oral hypokalemia. If the patient is presented with symptoms of severe hypokalemia like quadriparesis, patient in the altered sensorium, or complete rhabdomyolysis, we need to start the patients immediately on IV hyp correction. So how we need to give is, we need to give the KCL in the maximum of 10 milliequivalents per hour in the peripheral veins, or 20 milliequivalents per hour in the central line. So it is better to have the central line in all of these patients to avoid phlebitis. So excessive potassium exposure in the veins may cause the thrombophlebitis in these patients. So there is a rules of potassium correction which has to be remembered in all type of patients. One is, this is the maximum permissible level in peripheral as well as central line, and potassium maximum can be given like 40 milliequivalents in 1 liter of NS, and the maximum potassium can be given in 1 day is 240 milliequivalents per 24 hours. And always give the potassium in NS alone. Why? Can we give the potassium in 5% dextrose? No, because normally the 5% dextrose will be causing the release of insulin, and this will turn causes the potassium influx into the cells. So this may exacerbate the underlying hypokalemia. So whenever correcting the hypokalemia, always try to give the potassium in the normal saline solution. Never use 5% dextrose for the correction of hypokalemia. So this is the basic mechanism of correcting the hypokalemia. When the patient is not responding to the correction of hypokalemia by IV route, we can start the patient along with the oral hypokalemia correction by the Ryle's tube feeding. So oral KCL can be given in the dose of normally 15 ml TDS in mild hypokalemia. We can start the patient on 30 to 60 ml TDS for the maximum response to be obtained. So normally 20 milliequivalents of KCl solution will raise the potassium by 0.25 milliequivalents only. So we need to monitor the patient's potassium every 2 hourly to avoid the detrimental effect of hyperkalemia. The final option can be correction of magnesium. We have already discussed that hypomagnesemia associated with the excessive activation of the ROMK channel. When you are expecting the correction of 0.25 milliequivalents for 20 milliequivalents, for example, you have given the patient of 100 milliequivalents of potassium. So the patient's serum potassium at least should rise by 1 milliequivalents. If there is no adequate response to the IV KCl, we need to consider giving the magnesium sulfate as the treatment option for correcting the hypokalemia. So this is the basic behind the hypokalemia correction. In our next class, we will discuss about the management of hyperkalemia.